A bald-headed white man sits in a dimly lit prison cell, his tattoos vividly displayed on his arms, telling stories of his past. Shadows dance across the walls as he contemplates his choices, surrounded by the echoes of distant conversations.
So what did they call you?
I go by Ryan, my first name. I do have a graffiti name, Emyr, E-M-Y-R, but everybody calls me Ryan.
Ryan, were you incarcerated for, sir, and how long was your sentence?
Okay, so I originally came into prison for 2 counts of attempted murder. I got sentenced to, I took a deal for 25 years at 85% with 4 strikes.
And from my understanding, you've actually picked up additional time while incarcerated as well, sir?
Yeah, I picked up time 3 different times in here for 3 separate attempted murders. I picked up 1 strike on one of them, so I've got 5 strikes total. Yeah, I picked up first one I picked up 9 years at 66%, and then the next one I got 6 years at 66%, and then I got 11 years at 66%.
Where you from out here on the streets, right?
I'm from Huntington Beach, California.
And do you or did you at any time point in your life belong to any type of gangs, groups, organizations, or anything like that?
I was never part of a gang or anything, but I've always associated with people within gangs, you know, doing drug deals and whatnot, running around with that lifestyle.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Okay, yeah. So my childhood was actually pretty good. My mom and dad are actually still together, and they've been together, you know, my whole life, right? I got a little brother. He's doing really well. He's actually an ER doctor, right? But see, what happened with me, I was at a young age I was diagnosed with like ADD. I never really did well in school. My mom was a school teacher, so I kind of felt like the pressure was on me, right? But I was always kind of like overly sensitive, right? So I guess you could say I turned my sensitivities into anger. And then, you know, I grew up playing hockey, and when I hit 14 years old is when I started using like smoking weed. I started drinking, and I started actually doing like graffiti art. That's actually one thing that kind of like opened up my mind. I'm like, wow, I got a cool talent. But at the same time, it was also rebellious as well. But when I was a kid, like I didn't really experience anything traumatic. I grew up in like your standard white picket fence in Huntington. Okay, so yeah, so I caught this case 2013 in November, and that whole year was actually pretty bad. So 2010 is when I really started going to jail. I was in and out of jail for sales. And then 2012, I did my last probation violation. I got out with no tail, which means I got out no probation, free and clear. I was good, right? But when I got out, I was continuing using right? And but 2013, it got pretty bad. That year started off pretty bad. I actually started off the year having an abortion with a girl. And then I actually started doing witchcraft myself. I started doing witchcraft that year. I started just becoming more and more hopeless, right? And then my heroin addiction became pretty bad. And actually, that probably a couple of months before I got arrested, I actually broke into my parents' house, stole a bunch of money out of their safe, right? And some of that money I was given to a friend of mine for some money for heroin, right? And that money went up missing to some other people, but I started accusing him of stealing the money. And long story short on that, I tried to kill him. I shot him, and then the person he was with, he was driving. One of his friends was driving him, and I tried to kill both of them. So that whole year, 2013, was just completely bad from the start. the drugs. It was all revolved around drugs, right? And I just kept building bad karma upon bad karma.
Would you be able to take me there to that day, Ryan, and elaborate on exactly how that whole day played out? What was it that happened, and how was it that you got caught?
Yeah. I'll tell you exactly. Yeah. So that whole day, I was staying at a Motel 6 over in Westminster, and I was with a girl, and see, originally for like the past couple of weeks, I had a friend, right, and he had a gun, and him and I were kind of like conversating about this drama I had with my friend, right, and I guess you could say he was like the devil on my shoulder as well, right, negative influence, and so he had the gun, and this girl I was with, she was actually talking to my friend who I was plotting on, right? And she was so I grabbed the phone from her, and I acted like I was her talking to him, right? And so then I left the motel by myself. I picked up my friend who had the gun, and then he took the driver's seat of my truck, and I basically lured my friend who was my target at the time to like to an area, like it was in a neighborhood, and I remember so my friend at the time, he was in the passenger seat, and some guy was driving him. They were in an Audi. In fact, there's actually a newspaper article in Orange County Register too about that incident as well, if you type in my name. So what happened was, my friend that had the gun, who was driving my truck, pulled up next to him, and I pulled up, and I pulled out the gun, and I was in the passenger window. I shot the driver. He got shot in the eye, and then I unloaded 7 more rounds on my friend who was my target at the time. And then we spun, and then after the gun was empty, we spun off. Right, so we spun off. We drove to my buddy's house who had the gun. I dropped him off, and then I put the gun in the hood of my car near the engine, right? I closed the thing. After that, I drove back to the motel where I was at, and the girl I was with, she's like, well, where were you? And I was like, oh, don't worry about it. I went to my friend's house, right, real quick, and then so the night went through, because the incident happened around like maybe 4 or 5 in the morning, and it was real foggy out too. I remember that, so I went back to the motel. I was with the girl. We were hanging out the rest of the night. We were doing drugs together, and after checkout time, we left. Right, we left. We were driving. And I actually remember the motel was on the one side of the 405 freeway, and the incident where it happened was the other side of the 405 freeway. So when I was driving over the bridge, I looked over the bridge and I see the cop cars still over there. I was like, okay, and she's like, what are you looking at? And I was like, oh, nothing. So what I did actually too, I told her about what I just did. So just in case I got in trouble, I wanted to use her as an alibi. Of course, she kind of freaked out because at that time, I thought I had killed 2 people, right? I didn't know they were still alive, so I told her, hey, I just killed 2 people. I killed so-and-so, who she knows, all right? And then so after that, I got busted 13 hours later after the incident, and I went to my dad's wood shop in Costa Mesa.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
At the time, I was driving a Ford F-150, and I had a Tanya cover at my dad's wood shop. So we went to the wood shop. We were putting the Tanya cover on. My dad pulled up the wood shop, and my dad's like, hey, Ryan, there's a bunch of cops down the street, right? And I look up in the sky, and I see the helicopter flying around. And honestly, I was kind of like in a state of denial, but I was also in a state of like deer in headlights, where I was just like, I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to run to make myself look guilty, so I was just like, okay, just play it cool. Maybe they're doing a raid down the street. I don't know. I just didn't. I was just in shock, right? So a couple hours go by, the sun starts setting. I thought it was good, all right, cool, the sun's down, this and that. And I literally just get the tongue cover on, and as I'm closing it, next like a Westminster PD in full SWAT gear comes in around the corner. They handcuff my dad. They'd have their M16s out on me. They throw me to the ground. They kind of kick me a little bit. That kind of stunned me. They handcuffed me, and I remember I was sitting on the curb next to an anthill, right? Because I remember all these ants were crawling over me. And they asked me the initial questions like, "Hey, what were you doing here?" Well, like at this time and that time, I was like, "Oh, I was just with this girl. I left to go get some Del Taco. I came back and we hung up, and then now here we are, right?" So they arrested me. They took the girl in too because she was still with me, and I went to Westminster PD. And I remember going in there, and I sat in the holding tank for a little bit, and they pulled me into interrogation. And I was trying to play it cool at the time, to like ask me, "Hey, well, where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to high school? This and that." And I was answering those questions, kind of trying to play as if like, "Hey, what's going on?" type of thing. And so then they started asking me about the guy who I had shot, right? And I was like, "Oh yeah, I don't know anything about that. I don't want to talk anymore." So they put me back in the holding tank. I lawyered up, and then that's when they told me, they're like, "Hey, you're being charged with 2 counts of attempted homicide. One's in critical condition, and the other one's about to die." And then they slammed the door on me, and I was like, "Oh wow!" Like, and that's how that day went. Yeah. No, well, see, at the time, when I originally got arrested, when I got handcuffed and put myself in the car, I mean, right then, sitting in the back of that cop car, I was like, it's a wrap. Like, at the time, I thought these 2 guys were dead, right? I'm like, I'm going in for a double murder. And I remember driving from Costa Mesa all the way to Westminster on the 405, just like seeing like home. Like I grew up my whole life around there, and I'm just like, that's it. Like I'm gone, I'm gone. So in my head, I'm like, okay, I'm facing life. That's a fact. And then when they said that, when they said attempted homicide, 2 counts of attempted homicide, I'm like, okay, well, maybe it won't be so bad, but either way, it's going to be bad, right? So I called my dad, and
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Let me go ahead and call you back.
Okay.
All right. Where I left off was basically at the time, I thought I was getting, life sentence, right? So I'm facing life now. I thought it was a wrap. I'm looking at where I grew up. I'm on my way to the police station, right? And so I called my dad and I acted like, hey, they're charging me with these charges. I don't know what they're talking about. Call our uncle, because my uncle's a lawyer. I'm like, call him and see if he knows anything. And Dad's like kind of like, all right, well, he just didn't know. Now talking to my dad now, right? He knew, like, at that time. He's like, yeah, because at that time my parents knew I was heavily into drugs, this and that, and my dad tells me now, he's like, yeah, I remember that day. It was like, all right, well, he's in God's hands now, right? He's gonna be safe. Because honestly, it's a tragedy that saved my life. It really was, right? But at that day and time, it was. I felt numb. I felt tired. I guess looking back on it subconsciously, it was kind of like relieved. I'm off the streets, right? I don't know how to describe that. I mean, I'm not relieved people got hurt, But at that time, I was still in that zone, right? And it's funny, or not really funny, but 4 days prior to that, I got this girl and I, when we were hanging out, we got pulled over. We got possession. We woke up at the county jail, and we got a DA reject. We got sent back out. So when I was in county jail, I was in a certain pod in the main jail of that main jail in Santa Ana.